Bowling with the Theft.
I encourage you to get theft.
Your bowling stories.
For all things the game of bowling.
Every week.
Helping bowlers.
The hand collapses down.
Live.
And I'm going to try to bowl the best I can.
2,000 subscribers. 2,000 subscribers.
I want to challenge Chad Nelson.
Tom Corbett.
Jason Belmonte.
Let's do this. This is Bowling with the Pfaff.
Well, hey everyone, good Wednesday evening and welcome to another episode of Bowling with the Pfaff, a platform for you to share your unique bowling story live on our YouTube channel. It is a big week in the sport, lots going on. I want to start out at the World Series of Bowling, which is underway right now in Reno, Nevada. You got Tim Foy Jr. on top in the qualifying for the Scorpion Championship. Mr. Foy has appeared on multiple telecasts this year. He's having what I think you could safely call a breakout season, and good to see him in the running right now in the Scorpion event. Jason Belmonte, who you may have heard averaged better than 250 in his first block, is hanging around in fourth place, still bowling the last of his 11th and 12th games of this block. And we'll see how they all end up. But about 5-6 different tournaments all in one at the National Bowling Stadium. So cool stuff for bowlers and fans of the professional sport alike. And there is more. The Mike Albee Nevada Classic was contested, although not finished. We're down to the final 5, and Andrew Anderson will go into that telecast as the top seed, followed by EJ Tackett, Ethan Fiore, Alec Keplinger, and Jesper Svensson. You can catch that one on Saturday, March 15th. So a week from this Saturday, 5 p.m. Wisconsin time on FS1. And we also had the Roth-Holman doubles this past weekend, which was recorded from an earlier event in Vernon Hills, Illinois, where we found out that Bill O'Neill and Jason Belmonte had their second Roth-Holman doubles victory. They came out of that one on top. Of course, EJ Tackett, again, a 2-time titleist, won major already, and probably on the fast path right now. I know it's still early, but the fast path to another Player of the Year award. We'll have to see how that pans out as the second half of the tour season gets going in earnest here. Hey, don't forget we have a merch store, etsy.com/shop/bowlingwiththepfaffco. T-shirts and hoodies show your support for the show and all that other good stuff. Stay warm as the temperature is still coolish, I guess you could say. We're about freezing where I'm at, and that's cool enough for me. But even in spring, T-shirts a good play there for you. We have a host of sponsors here. Jerry's Score More Bowling Supply inside Wagner's Lanes in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. 715-559-1822 is the number. Bowling balls, bowling accessories, bowling bags, the best coaching in Western Wisconsin. Jerry's got it all, and if you need it, he will be there for you. Visionary Video Hub, my own video production company. Video production, live streaming, voiceover, and podcasting. Find out more at visionaryvideohub.com. And
Raise your snack standards. Chip Magnet Salsa.
to this day, Jim constantly tells me to raise my snack standards. I tell him, I eat the salsa, it's great. And he insists that I raise my snack standards. Hey, you can raise yours at promo code BWTF2025 when you're on chipmagnetsalsa.com. Enter that code, put in a 6-pack order, and you'll receive 25% off. Or look for it in your local grocery store. In the Milwaukee area, you can find it at Woodman's, Sendik's, Festival Foods, Pick and Save, Metro Market, Outpost, several Piggly Wiggly stores, and Metcalf's in Wauwatosa. You can also find it on Amazon. Just search for the Chip Magnet store and stock up because you'll need it. Chip Magnet, raise your snack standards, not just mine. And a big thank you to all our sponsors for their support of local bowling and Bowling with the FEF. All right, tonight's guest spent 8 years at the head of the Bowling Centers Association of Wisconsin, retired, and then is now back in a consultant's role. Yvonne Bennett grew up near Washington, D.C., but came to Wisconsin and is now showing lots of people about the history, the rich history of Wisconsin's vintage alleys. She runs the Vintage Alleys Tour, which is coming up next month, and very excited for that. Yvonne is joining us from Milwaukee in a show that's called She's Back. And Yvonne, it has been such a long time. We've been conversing back and forth online. I feel like I know you, yet we haven't met in person, but welcome to the show. Really glad to have you on.
Well, thank you, Fef, and it's good to be here virtually from Glenwood City and Leaker Place.
You kind of airlifted the center down there, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Or they airlifted me up there.
Right. Yeah. Let's start out there with the Vintage Alleys Tour. I'll put up your flyer here once I get to the top of my graphics. There we go. It's coming up Saturday, April 5th, 2025, and it is anchored in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is basically where I'm at. Tell me about this particular Vintage Alleys Tour. What are folks going to see and experience up here in northwestern Wisconsin?
Well, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity, and also to BCAW for being able to represent them and to host this tour. This is actually the 10th tour being hosted by BCAW, and this is in an area of the state that we've never been to. We've spent a lot of time in central and southeastern Wisconsin, and when I left their employment about a year ago, one of the areas I really wanted to see us try to get to was up in your area in northwestern Wisconsin. So about 2 months ago, I was out visiting bowling centers. We always focused on our member centers. This is a BCAW program, so we really want to feature and highlight our vintage era bowling centers that are in membership. And we had a number that were members. We had a couple that were not members, and some that were considering membership. So getting out and visiting these centers to explain to them about the Vintage Alleys Tour and to see about their interest was something that, like I said, in your area, I always had hoped to do. Leaker's Place and Gales Lanes, Galesville, both have been members for the last 3 years since they went through new ownership. But Club 10 in Durand is a new member. So I'm excited that, you know, one of our goals in the past was to use this as a tool for membership and retention. And BCAW did obtain one new member through the program. So it's going to be an exciting day. We're going to start, as you mentioned, in Eau Claire. There's a park and ride there in Eau Claire, and then we're going to go to Leaker's Place. And from there, we're going to go to Club 10. We're going to have lunch there, which if people have not been to Club 10 since the newest ownership went in about 3 years ago, it's they've really done a nice job with the bar and the restaurant area. And Janelle and Matt Vogel, the new owners there, I'm excited to bring this event to them and to give them an opportunity to feed our guests. So it'll be a showcase opportunity for them. And then from there, we're going down to Galesville and Gales Lanes, which also is under relatively new ownership. And they joined when the current ownership bought the bowling center in 2021. So we'll go there as a wrap up. We'll enjoy some pizzas there as well, and then get back up to Eau Claire for a 6 o'clock back at the park and ride. So it'll be a full day. It should be hopefully good weather. That's always, you know, April's always sort of an uncertain exactly in Wisconsin, but it's a beautiful part of the state. And we've got, you know, a full motor coach accommodations getting us around, and it'll be a fun day. It'll be a real fun day.
This Vintage Alleys Tour is such a neat idea for those of us kind of immersed in the sport. How did this all start for you?
Well, you alluded to my 8 years as the executive director of BCAW. When I joined the staff in 2014, we had about 170 members. And as I was getting out and meeting bowling center owners and talking about the programs of both BPAA and BCAW, so many of the small centers, 2, 4, 6, 8 lane centers, really didn't see a relevance in membership for them. And we started just talking specifically to them in small groups about what would be of value to you. And in 2016, we held a focus group and we started thinking about something like a poker run. But that really became a little unruly pretty quickly. And then I got to thinking about my personal interest in breweries and wineries and getting in a van or in a coach and being chauffeured around and enjoying some cocktails and snacks through the day. And I'm like, well, why not bowling alleys? So in 2017, we did the very first one in the fall, and it's grown ever since. The other part of what kind of was in play here was the work that Kevin Hong was doing out of Seattle, Washington, with what was at that time called Vintage Alleys Project. In 2017, he received the BCAW Media Award for that project. He's since evolved it. It's now Maple Plus Pine by Kevin Hong. But knowing that there was a national interest and respect for vintage bowling throughout the country, we have more of these little small places than anywhere else in the United States that are still operational. So with 30 or 40 of them, it seemed to be just a natural thing for us to do. And we've been very successful. BCAW has been very successful in bringing them into membership and then having them find value and retain their membership, even though they're too small, perhaps to pour Pepsi or participate in Cisco, and their communities, perhaps high school and middle school programs are being hosted at larger centers in their communities. But this really has proven to be, a nice niche for those small vintage era, old school bowling alleys. And I've been told, don't call them bowling centers, call them bowling alleys. I know in the industry, we've, been through, a lot of conversation about it being disrespectful to call them an alley, but these are truly bowling alleys and they embrace that and represent it very well.
Yeah. 2 points I want to make on all that. First of all, if any of those center alleys owners are watching tonight, let me tell you, first of all, that we, if I can speak for the entire bowling community, we value what you have and what you bring to our sport. There are so many from my childhood that are no longer around, some older than others for a variety of reasons. But to have, that rich history represented in the current day by your family businesses and the folks who enjoy, being repeat customers at those centers, let me just say that it is a big deal to a lot of us. And I hope, you have the success that you need to keep those centers going through the generations. The other thing is Maple and Pine. Look it up on Facebook. If you don't follow it already, please follow it. Kevin's pictures are fantastic. You will really appreciate, bowler or not, the detail that he puts in to his work. So I wanted to try and find someone who had been on one of these tours. And I only knew of one, and that was Fran Bax. And he said that his wife, Patty, and he have been on 2 Vintage Alleys tours, which he said were a lot of fun. And we had the opportunity to meet and bowl with some incredible people like Roger Dalkin and Neil Stremmel. Is that kind of something that happens on these? Does Roger come along on these tours, or were those kind of special occasions or just different circumstances?
Well, it's ironic that you mentioned Roger. This tour coming up will be the first tour out of the 10 that he will miss. Roger started coming on the tours back in 2017 at the beginning, just as a bowling enthusiast. Roger and I, our friendship and professional relationship goes back more than 25 years. And Roger, out of support for the industry and for vintage era places like you just alluded to, started coming on the tours. So Roger's been on all of them just as a guest, as an enthusiast. And then he joined our staff at BCAW in 2019 as a program manager. And then Neil Stremmel was the executive director that replaced me when I retired the first time. So Neil was on that first tour that Fran and Patty joined us on as the incoming executive director. So it was unique that Neil was on board, but again, it was out of his position as the executive director at the time. And Roger has been on all of them until now. He's got a conflict the weekend of the 5th of April, and will be unable to make it. So I'll throw in a shameless plug out here. My husband, who I think is out there in the audience, he's been on all 10 of them, or will have been on all 10 of them. He's kind of my right-hand person, along with my sister when she's in town to help with these. But David's been on, will be all 10 of them coming up. But yeah, it's unique, I think, to have somebody of the caliber of people like Roger and Neil. But then again, if you think about bowling in the state of Wisconsin and here in the Milwaukee area, when the bowling headquarters for ABC, WIBC, YBA, USA Bowling, and then later USBC was here, you know, there's some pretty high-powered people still in our bowling community. And from time to time, we have some folks that, you know, have joined a tour here or there. But obviously, Roger and Neil are two of the highlights for sure.
Yeah. I got to ask, Fran's from Buffalo. I mean, he's been on 2 of these things. Do you regularly get people from states away to come in for this?
Well, we do get people from states away from here. We've had folks from Nebraska. There's 2 guys, Eric Jensen from Lincoln and Skip Bierman from Omaha, who have been on several of these, both, again, to your point earlier, enthusiasts about vintage era. And both of them just enjoy getting in the car and going and bowling in places and doing some pretty crazy things. But we've had people from Iowa, from Illinois, from Minnesota, and then my family from Virginia and Tennessee have also come in. Fran and Patty is an interesting story because I actually know Fran from my East Coast days. So growing up in the Northern Virginia area, I knew Fran when he was a PBA Eastern player, and my ex-husband at the time was also a PBA player. So I knew Fran as a bowler's wife and later as a competitor in Wausau. So with the Wausau Women's All-Star Association. So that's the friendship with Fran. And then once I started doing these tours, I'm like, you guys got to come and, you know, come have some fun with us. And they came that first time, and then they came again last year, thinking it was going to be my last time. I think they came out of respect of my last tour, and they had a good time at Holler House and in Milwaukee and wanted to come back.
Yeah.
But it's kind of crazy. You're right that we actually, before the COVID year, we had a tour set up for April of 2020. And for that one, we actually had a father and son from Pennsylvania who had just randomly heard about the tour, you know, probably from social media, and they had registered and unfortunately haven't been able to schedule coming back, only because I think the son's probably away at college, and, you know, as college kids go, gotten pretty busy. But there have been other people interested around the country. Randy out in Colorado, I think he's one of your followers. He's from time to time wanted to bring groups in, and sometimes the scheduling is just so peculiar because we have such a narrow window. You know, we generally try to do them October, early November, and then in April, because if we get too much into April and into May, bowling in Wisconsin, especially in these small rural communities, just sort of shuts down. And so it's just a perfect narrow window that we have when we do put them together.
Yeah. Fran also mentioned Yvonne is such a great tour guide that I could probably easily get her a job in the Niagara Falls tourist industry in a heartbeat, since her passion and in providing information about the Milwaukee area and its landmarks is incredible. Is it limited to bowling, or is there some extras in there?
Fran's got me blushing. I know he wasn't able to join us live on the podcast tonight. I'm just a travel enthusiast and a bit of a geek about many things. On my Facebook profile, it says I'm easily distracted, and it doesn't take much for me on a road trip to just all of a sudden go off and look at lighthouses or other historical buildings. Cream City Bricks here in the southeastern part of Wisconsin is one of the things I sort of geek about. And yeah, bowling obviously is my first heart sport and something that's pretty deeply ingrained in my family and growing up. And it's pretty hard for me to even drive from one part of the country to the other without stopping and, you know, seeing bowling centers, because you literally, as you drive through small communities, you can almost feel the presence of a bowling center. My sister and I and her family were driving through Berlin, New Hampshire, and I was just telling stories about bowling. And I'm like, this is the kind of place in Wisconsin that would have a bowling alley right here on Main Street. And literally a block later, there was a bowling alley. And it was the middle of the morning and they weren't open. But when we came back through that evening, the place was open. So we stopped in and the guy was just kind of shocked. It was a 10-lane AMF center. I think you might have a picture of it in some of the collage of stuff I sent to you. But, it's just that kind of a thing of, when you have joy from a sport or a game like bowling and to have an opportunity to share it with others, you're going to find out if we're not careful, we can be talking till 10 o'clock tonight because I love it so much. And I feel so fortunate and blessed to have been able to work in bowling for the years that I did. And I continue now to do it in a different role for BCAW.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I'm situated in the basement level of our house, and I have a blue Cat 6 cable that goes all the way up to where the router is. I wonder some of these times if Mrs. Pfaff isn't tempted to just, yank it out of the thing if I'm running over, but whatever. Hopefully she doesn't see that and get any funny ideas.
Well, Mr. Bennett's in Bloomington, Indiana with his mother right now. So, I've got all the time in the world tonight.
There you go. All right. So for people who are maybe just hearing about the Vintage Alleys Tour for the first time, interested in perhaps, making the trip to Eau Claire and joining you, what do they need to do?
Well, they need to go to the BCAW website. That's at bowlwi.com. And there's an events page or flyout tab, and they can click on that and then they can register online. Or I see there's moving towards QR code. So there is a QR code there on the flyer that they've produced. The registration is $129 until I believe it's March 21st, or while space is available. While the motor coach will hold up to 36 people, we do try to keep the group size to about 30 bowlers. And depending on the size of the bowling centers, like when we're at Holler House or a 2-lane place where we have to go down and bowl in shifts, we may even, keep the head count down to about 25. But all they need to do is register in advance, pay the $129 a person. I think as of last week, we were about half full based on what I heard from the staff at BCAW. So there is still plenty of space and time for people to get signed up. But don't wait, because we have had them sell out in the past and people get pretty disappointed when they were counting on it and planned the time off, but then either forgot or didn't get around to, getting their registration in.
Yeah. And you can find more information at the link in the description of this video. I'll also post some information in the Facebook group so you'll be well informed about the Vintage Alleys Tour. All right, let's get into your story. I mentioned that you're from the East. You're not originally from Wisconsin. Tell us about where you grew up and how you got into bowling.
Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia, inside the Beltway. My family were transplants. My dad was from South Georgia, my mom from Colorado and Wyoming. They relocated after they got married into the DC area, and they met bowling actually in France when they were both stationed there during the Korean conflict in the 50s. So bowling is inherent in my family background. In the late 70s, my dad worked for Bowl America, which at the time that I was growing up in the DC area, we were predominantly a corporate environment. Most of the bowling centers were either Bowl America or the old chain Fairlanes. Fairlanes later was sold to AMF, and then later what centers are left with them became Boleros, or now, the new company. Exactly. But I grew up in bowling. There were some independent bowling centers in our area. And while I was in a Bowl America environment, I did bowl at McLean Bowling Center, which was my home center in the town where I lived. And I bowled in some other smaller centers. And for us, when we talked about smaller centers, probably the biggest changes or difference was that small for us was 32 lanes. Yeah. Well, here in Wisconsin, 32 is humongous. Mm-hmm. And from a national perspective, BPA considers anything over 16 to be of average size or larger. But, where I grew up, they were big bowling centers and they were big chain centers. And I had the opportunity to bowl in some of the top leagues as a high school bowler. My dad was one of those purists back in the day that, until I was old enough and strong enough to actually walk and swing the ball and do it right. He wasn't going to let me belly bowl or do it between my legs or whatever. So I started bowling at the age of 10, and it just kind of went from there. My first paying job was working behind the control desk of the bowling centers my dad managed out of petty cash. And then my first, what I call W-2 real job, was at the McLean Bowling Center where I grew up. And then later I worked in other bowling centers until I got through college and then went into retail management. But the DC market is my home, and I still call it home, even though I have no family or, direct family still living there. I have a lot of friends there, but that's about it.
Sure. Well, by the looks of this picture that you sent, you were a quick study, weren't you?
Well, that would be the way my dad taught me. That would be 1969 at McLean Bowling Center. And that would have been probably my second year bowling, and I was probably sporting that brand new bowling shirt I got for Christmas.
You look intense, like you really want to get those pins down. But
well, it's been said more than once that was a pretty intense photo for a 10 or 11-year-old.
Yeah.
I guess in 69 I would have been 11.
Okay. All right. You kind of got the bug early and stayed with it. Was there something about the sport, the people around you, the places, anything like that kind of kept you hooked, or was it just the concept of our sport?
It was the social. It was from grade school through middle school and high school. It was the social. All of my friends at the time, all were from bowling. I used to joke that every boyfriend, every serious relationship I had through my first marriage, they were all bowlers. Mm-hmm. So it was my life. It was where I recreated. That's where I socialized. That's where I got in trouble. I wish I had the opportunities and the discipline that kids have today that make them successful in the lanes. Because frankly, I didn't have that discipline. I was more on the social party side of life in the 70s.
Sure. Tell us, who are Willie J. Jelks and Bobby Michelson?
So Willie J. Jelks and Bobby Michelson. So Bobby Michelson was one of those boyfriends from high school. Met him my senior year in high school, and he was a year older than me. He had turned adult in the middle of his junior year in high school and was one of the best bowlers in the DC area as a high school kid. Mm-hmm. Willie Jelks was his mentor. And so when Bobby turned adult and, went out into the adult world of bowling, Willie Jelks was there to a pretty ragtag bunch of kids. And he was somebody, and his wife, Cheryl Jelks, I don't know if Cheryl's on the call right now. Willie died in 2014 after a long illness, and was pretty hard on a lot of us. But Willie taught some life lessons sitting around the bowling alley, shooting the breeze and telling what we call WJJ stories. And some of my adult lessons in life I learned from Willie at 2 and 3 in the morning at pot games. So pretty special people. Willie went into the Hall of Fame in the nation's capital area, I think in the late 90s. And then on his deathbed, it was his telling stories that brought to light this ragtag bunch of kids, Bobby and myself included, and Cheryl Jelks, his then widow, and or later widow, and Ricky Brooks started to tell those stories with the Hall of Fame committee. Bobby went into the Hall of Fame, I want to say in 2016, and I went in 2019, but it was thanks in large part to Willie just telling those stories and talking about the legacy of some kids that grew up around him in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, for sure. What about this picture? Who are these folks around you?
Oh my gosh. So before there was the what's now the Junior Gold program, or back, between the Junior Gold program and the Coca-Cola Youth Bowling Championships by YABA, there was the All-American Youth Bowling Championships that was sponsored and conducted by the National Bowling Council. It was a national program and a national event, and there were scratch and handicap divisions. And I was fortunate to win out of my center and my state as the girls scratch champion. That's me second from the left. And then to the left in that photo is a kid by the name of Gary Harris. He was the boys scratch champion for Virginia, from Woodbridge, Virginia. And then the two on the other side and the gentleman in the middle are all from Danville, Virginia. I don't remember their names, to be honest with you. But what I do remember about that year was the young lady in the girls handicap division. She had a twin sister. And because there were a lot of girls in the handicap division, there were only 3 of us in the scratch division. Her twin sister competed in the scratch division and quite frankly gave me a good run for the title and the opportunity to represent Virginia. But fortunately, I prevailed and got to go. That year, the regional was in Dearborn Heights and Satellite Bowl in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. So it was the first time I'd ever been to an 84-lane center representing the state of Virginia. But that's who that group is. And the gentleman in the middle from Danville, because they had 2 kids, he was our chaperone.
Ah, okay. All right. So you have obviously these tournament experiences, these on big stages. Did you have the opportunity to bowl for your high school team, anything like that?
High school bowling in our area was very different. It was more of a club activity in the bowling centers and at the high schools. And our high school, Langley High School, had some of the better bowlers in the Northern Virginia area. And so we bowled leagues out of our high school, but not really in a formal program like what BCAW has here in Wisconsin. That picture that you're showing now was taken in Alexandria, Virginia at 10-Pin Coliseum. That would have been probably January of 1975, my senior year in high school, at the Northern Virginia Travel League. They came and did a short article on me, and the photographer, I almost flushed him off. He was on the gutter caps, and I was playing straight up the 1 or 2 board and pretty much brushed him back like a slider pitch from a baseball game. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, you didn't warn me that you're going to be playing out that far." But you know, the lanes were always dry back on Saturday afternoon. It didn't seem like back in the day they oiled them after leagues on Friday night. You know, we had double shifted Friday night leagues, Saturday morning early youth leagues, and then travel league bowled at 2 o'clock on Saturday. So they were pretty dry. So those of us that grew up bowling back then learned to play straight up or swing the outside line, you know, with a relative amount of success. But like I said, the photographer, his name was Hank Williams, ironically, said, "Oh, you should have warned me because I almost fell off the gutter cap."
I'm doing my best to keep these in chronological order. How am I doing so far?
You're doing okay.
All right. Is this the next one in the sequence?
That probably would be. So that would have been, I was either a junior or senior in college. I chose not to bowl collegiately. I had the opportunity to bowl at Lynchburg College or at Virginia Tech. And I chose to turn adult and bowl competitively for money when back then you had to make a choice. So I stayed in town. I went to George Mason University in Fairfax. And like I said, my junior or senior year in college, I got involved locally with the local association. And that was me and my board of directors jacket. And I served for a 1-2 year term with them.
All right. And you continued that success as an adult, right? One of the top ranking bowlers of 78, 79 right there.
Right. This picture would have been probably just before the one that you just showed as my board picture. But yep, I was ranked as a college student with the big girls, as they would say. I'll tell you that number 4, Debbie Roberts, was one of my best friends bowling, and she was a year older than me, but we were both, you know, teenagers. Most of the other women in our association, as you can see, are significantly older than us. Berlin Myers actually bowled on the women's tour and had some success coming out of Fairleigns University over in Maryland. But it was a pretty special time to grow up in bowling in the DC area back then.
Yeah. You alluded to it a little bit earlier on, bowling at 2, 3 in the morning. Were there action matches? Were you bowling for money against other women, guys? Anything?
I relatively didn't bowl against or with women. I was fortunate that probably in 76 or 77, as scratch leagues, the men's traditional scratch leagues were starting to wane a little bit, they opened up to women. So they made the leagues mixed, and most of the leagues allowed, you could be all men, you could be 4 men and 1 woman, you could be 5 women, but they were scratch. And most of the leagues back then had a max entering average. To show the difference in today versus back then, the McLean All-Stars, as an example, I think probably had a 9 or 925 5-player max for entering averages. So you can do the math. That's about 180 or 183 a player. And so I bowled against the guys. I found bowling in the travel league, it was mostly men. There were, if we were a 16-team league with 3, it was trios. If there were 48 or 50 players, there might have been 3 or 4 of us girls on the league or on teams, but for the most part, it was boys and later men. So I grew up bowling against the men, and that action at 2 or 3 in the morning. I ran pot games at Bowl America Falls Church for a number of years, later at Reston Bowling Center. And then as I got more confident in my ability, and with the encouragement of Ken Shaw, who was my first husband and a bowler, Eastern Regional, Southern Regional player, I started bowling with the guys in pot games, and it became a little bit of a running joke at Bowl America Burke that between Ken and I, we'd take an extra paycheck out of there some Thursday nights after league, because it was very lucrative for us, and we did well as a couple and as 2 players. He taught me a lot about bowling that I was fortunate to have learned in my formative years, especially after we got married. We got married in 87. So, we talked a little bit about my college. I laid out of bowling for about 4 or 5 years while my career took me away. And then when I married Ken in 87, I came back to bowling. And so the Bowl America Burke years were sort of, the late 80s into the early 90s. But then I went to graduate school and I quit bowling again. Bowling for me, you asked earlier, bowling for me was never an end-all be-all in my career or in my life. It was something I did, and as I said, it was social and it was recreational, but I always saw myself with a career path that may or may not include bowling. And that's something that, quite honestly, if I had known there were careers in bowling, when I was a kid or when I was in college, I probably would have had an entirely different life path, through the late 70s and 80s that I discovered in the 90s when I went to work for YABA and moved to Milwaukee in 94.
Sure. Yeah. Fran did mention bowling with your ex. He said, in the Eastern and Southern regional events back in the 80s when you guys were dating. He also said that you 2 got reacquainted when social media became a thing, and recounted our interactions from back in the day, noting that he says he was flirting with you, which he will admit to.
Fran's a horn dog. You'll hear me say that, and I've said that to him. And Patty and I have had a little bit of a joke as I've gotten to know her over the years. David, my husband's probably hearing this for the first time, but that's okay too. Yeah, Fran, I remember one incident, one occurrence at the Showboat in Atlantic City. And it was a WASA PBA Eastern Regional event. And yeah, I knew he was flirting. I knew he was interested, but I was with Ken, and Ken and I, we weren't married yet, but Fran was just being Fran. And he had carried that New York attitude, that New York vibe, the gold chains. And I knew of him because of the big score he had shot in the ABC tournament, probably the year or 2 before, over in Niagara Falls. So he was well known to us down in the DC market.
Yeah. He has also been a guest on the show before, and has a great story of his own to tell. So yeah, I'd encourage anybody to look back at that one too. You mentioned going to YABA in Milwaukee at that time. How did that happen? How did you end up in the headquarters of the sport at the time. And what was it like to kind of pick up and end up here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty crazy story. So again, we've talked a little bit about Ken and his bowling. His claim to fame as a player, I would say he had marginal success. Locally, he was pretty feared in pot games and in action, because he was good and he could get in your head. He didn't have a lot of success on the PBA tour regionally. I mean, he had some cashes and some things like that. But at some point, he and a group of buddies, and I want to say it was probably 85, 86, just kind of got, bowling was too easy. And it's hard to call bowling easy in 85, 86 when averaging 200 was good. And now look at what people average. But he, on a lark, just decided to start bowling left-handed. So a whole group of them one summer decided they were going to bowl a summer league with the opposite hand. So there were 4 of them that were lefties and 1 that was a righty, opposite-handed.
Sure.
And Ken enjoyed it enough that he stuck with it. And I want to say it was the next summer that he shot like 8-0, do the math here. He shot 803. And the only reason why it was 803 and not something else was he had a triplicate 267 going into the last game, the last frame. And he thought he would just wing it out wide and shake it and maybe shake for 8 for another 267. But the ball came screaming back. He strikes, and now he's got 269. And instead of 01, he's got 03 or whatever the math works out to.
Sure.
So he was an ambidextrous player. And in the bowling season of 92, 93, he had ambidextrous 300s with both hands. And he was recognized in the ABC Bowling magazine as the 13th player to have ambidextrous 300s. And he had 300 in, at that point, he had 300s in the PBA at Kingsport in a regional. And he had other left-handed, and that was a left-handed 300, but he had never had a right-handed 300. And when he had, I think, his first right-handed 300, that's when ABC recognized him. So recognizing him for his 300s brought home the bowling magazine to our home that September or whatever. And I was proud of him. As a wife, I was very proud of him, but I was kind of flipping through, and there was a display ad for 2 positions with YABA. One was a field services manager position, and the other was a coaching and education manager's position. So I was just shocked that the job I was literally doing for Southland Corporation and 7-Eleven food stores was a job in bowling in Greendale, Wisconsin, and I could get paid for it. So I applied for the job. At that point, I was in the second year of my MBA program. They flew Ken and I both to Milwaukee. They interviewed me. They entertained him out at the tech and research building out back. And then they offered me a position, but the position they offered me was the position for the coaching and education position, because they had just filled the field services manager job. And I'm like, well, I could do that job, but it's really not in my wheelhouse. It's really not my interest. I wanted to be on the road socially doing bowling in bowling centers, kind of what I did at BCAW. Yeah. And they said, well, we need to get this position filled. We'll keep you in mind. We'll let you know how the search goes. So a couple months later, they called me, it was early December, and said, well, we've interviewed this person for the education and training or coaching position. And he's worked for Red Carpet Lanes. He's running a coaching program for them. He's got a degree in English. And I just laughed and said, that's the guy you need for the job. He's got all the credentials, and obviously it would be a stretch for me. But I appreciate that I was your first candidate. And that was David Doms. So they hired David Doms, who now YABA, now USBC, has an award named after him because he did great work. He's the creator, really, of the curriculum that ultimately became what's being used today, along with the work that Bob Mackey subsequently did. But he also was the one that created, back then it was called Junior Olympic Gold. And then we had to take the Olympic out of the name of the program because the USOC didn't take too kindly to it. But David Doms was hired. And then literally a month later, the person who they had hired in September took a job with another nonprofit in Milwaukee. and they called me and said, the job that you applied for in September is open, and if you're still interested, we'd love to have you on the team. So I gave a 2-week notice to Southland, and I moved and started March 1st. And Ken, because of the work he was doing, didn't come out until May. But it was an interesting thing because I had never I had moved for jobs before in the DC area, or, I lived in DC or in Alexandria, Virginia. Then I lived in Woodbridge, and then I lived in Fredericksburg, but I never moved across country, and certainly, not the kind of career shift from what I had known for 13 or 15 years to working in nonprofits. So getting to work for bowling in Greendale, and meeting people who have legacy that were known to me. And that's where I first met Roger Dawkin. He was on that YABA board of directors when I was hired, and I got the opportunity to work with him in 95. He was the chair of the International Workshop Committee for YABA, and David Doms at that point had been sick with colon cancer. So they had asked me to kind of lead that effort for that workshop in Peoria. And Roger and I worked very closely on that event. And, from that developed a very close collegial friendship, and then later a mentorship, and now the friendship that we have today, like I said, literally 30 years later.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it was life-changing.
Yeah. And to tell them, yeah, that job isn't really for me. Let's find out what happens down the line. But yet they called and you got back there. I feel like, some people wouldn't do that. They'd say, oh my gosh, this is YABA. I'm going to do whatever they want me to do.
Well, I've been pretty cavalier in my career and career choices over the years. I've had more than one job that should have been the dream job, that I've had to go to a board or to an executive director and say, this just isn't working for me, and either worked my way out of a job or just left a job unemployed and have to go figure it out somewhere else. And again, I was fortunate that, again, my marriage to Ken didn't last much longer. We divorced in 97, and I met David in 2000, and we married in 2002. But I've been fortunate that both men, Ken in Virginia and then David here in Wisconsin, have been very supportive of, like I said, sometimes my pretty cavalier approach to work, and, what I will do and what I won't do. And the YABA gig, David Patrick was the assistant executive director at the time. Joe Wilson was the executive director. That relationship with David Patrick also to this day is a friendship and a relationship and a mentorship that, I value, even though he retired when USBC left Wisconsin. And in fact, I just saw David, my husband David, and I just saw David a couple of summers ago down in San Antonio. So I don't know really what to say other than, if it's the right fit for you, I think people should go for it. But if it's not the right fit, save yourself some hassle and sometimes even chasing the money. I've made that career choice and regretted it as well. I'd rather work. And I took a pretty good cut in pay leaving Southland Corporation to go work for YABA when I did do it. It was a hard decision to go from, again, at that time, it was probably a $40,000 a year to a $32,000 a year decision. And we moved, for that. But it worked out for me in the long run. Unfortunately for the marriage, it didn't. So I kind of jokingly say I brought a husband and I got a husband. And I'm very, very happy that David has been a significant support in this journey through bowling, because I met him just literally as I was leaving what was Bowling Inc. at the time in 2000. We had gone on 2 dates and I said, this is fun, but I've just lost my job. I had been downsized in March of 2000. I said, I've just lost my job and I'm renting a house in Florida for a couple of months and I'll be back 4th of July. And that's kind of how my relationship with David started. And, when I got back, we started dating, but I always wanted to pursue what I thought were my passions and my interest in my career. And I worked in soccer for a number of years, and I did work in some other nonprofits or professional associations and societies. One was a great fit and one was not such a great fit, but I learned from all of them, and it culminated in the experience that I had for 8 years for BCAW. So I again feel pretty blessed to have had the career and the opportunities I had through and thanks to bowling.
Yeah. Was it a deal where, and you mentioned you kind of left bowling and came back, left and came back. Is it a deal where bowling kind of reeled you in again, or was it just a great opportunity at a great time and the stars align and it works out for you?
The YABA job, because I had come back to bowling as a competitor in '87, and I had bowled a couple of years, probably until '91. I was pretty dismayed with, again, how easy bowling got. I mean, I was averaging 180-ish in the early or mid 80s when I first quit. And then when I came back, I was bowling one night a week in a social league. My pro shop guy, Steve Sipe, told me I should get a gold angle urethane ball. And I was averaging like 190, swinging the gutter. And anything 5 to the gutter, as long as it didn't go off the lane, seemed to strike. I was terrible with spares, but I averaged $190, that first year back one night a week. And to me, bowling had changed, and so it was different. But, I had some success. I won some tournaments during that time. But then at Southland, things were starting to change internally with that company and their corporate structure. That's when I went back and I said, I need to get an MBA to be competitive here. And then, like, after one semester of going to school full-time while also working full-time, I just had no time in the evening for bowling. So I gave up bowling for, a year and a half, until then I started working at bowling headquarters, had that opportunity. And when I came into bowling here in Wisconsin, I started bowling leagues here. There was an office league on Wednesday. YABA and ABC together had an office league. And then Ken got indoctrinated pretty quickly into the bowling community because he met people through my work at YABA. So, he was very fortunate to get in with, I think, a really great group of guys here locally. And then I started bowling in leagues either adjacent to his leagues, or he'd bowl a men's league in the late shift and I bowl the ladies league in the early shift or something like that. But, I averaged 185 to 190, bowling a couple nights a week here in Wisconsin. But it was just different. I never felt the competitive juice here in Wisconsin, but I also had respect because some great bowlers were here. I knew of Gina Dereshevsky before I came here. I knew Jill Albrecht before I got here. There were great bowlers here, and I wasn't of that caliber or that discipline committed wise, to bowling. So to me, again, it was just kind of social and recreational. And then I had some knee problems, and I gave up bowling, as far as league bowling, probably in 2001, 2002. I still like to shoe up those old 1980 Lens. I still have 2 pairs of Lens Customs, and I'll shoe them up and I'll get out there and bowl with the guys every now and then on the Vintage Alleys tour, or, on a social opportunity. But it's just different. But I do enjoy it, and just wish I didn't have gimpy old lady knees.
Yeah. All right. So BCAW, tell us first of all, what is done at BCAW? Because a lot of us understand that BCAW is behind things like the Vintage Alleys Tour. They're behind the state high school tournament. But past that, there are many of us that don't really have a good grasp on what BCAW does and why it's important in bowling in Wisconsin.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the association. So they are the trade association that represents businesses in the state of Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan that have 10-pin bowling. They're affiliated with BPAA, the National Organization, Bowling Proprietors Association of America, both of which are 501c6 trade associations. And their missions, both at the national and the state level, and every other state association that's affiliated, is to enhance the members' profitability. So everything BCAW does in programming and work effort from the staff and the board is supposed to support that vision and the mission of enhancing members' profitability. So the programs, and I mentioned, the Vintage Alleys Tour, for us, we wanted to bring members into, small vintage era bowling alleys into membership, but we wanted to enhance their profitability. And the way that happens is by promoting vintage era bowling centers and doing advertising and marketing and promoting, getting the media, like the BCM magazine article I shared with you earlier today. That's great recognition for bowling in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, we've been fortunate for these small bowling centers, bowling alleys around the state, to have been featured in every major publication: BCM, Bowling Center Management, Bowlers Journal International, International Bowling Industry. All of those publications have featured multiple times bowling centers in Wisconsin, and it promotes bowling. So it helps individual centers, and it also helps the game and the sport, statewide. In terms of the other programs that BCAW does, unlike most states and state associations, BCAW is one of the few states in the country that run the high school and middle school bowling club programs. If you talk to Bo Gergen, and I know you had him on the show a few months ago.
Nope, haven't had him yet, but I've seen him interviewed before.
I thought you had him. Okay.
Nope,
well, then I might have to save him for my off the sheet later.
There you go.
So Bo Gergen, he's the executive director over at Bowling Centers Association of Michigan. In Michigan, their state athletic association runs the high school bowling program. And if you talk to anybody who's a bowler or understands the sport and the game of bowling, they would tell you it's horrible. It's great to have the affiliation in the high school where you get athletic support from athletic directors and maybe financial support for equipment or busing and things like that. But to have non-bowling people running your high school athletic program and making decisions that they don't really know what they're doing, it's just unfortunate. So here in Wisconsin, my predecessor, Gary Hartel, when they formed BCAW's high school bowling club program 27 years ago, wanted to keep it independent of Wisconsin WIAA. And when I came in, I will tell you, a lot of people were in my ear about, for bowling in Wisconsin to be recognized as a real sport, and I'll use my air quotes, you got to be affiliated with the State Athletic Association. I'm like, that's crazy. And having just come out of 10 years of state youth soccer, I saw the mess that they made out of state youth soccer. And so I'm pretty protective of trying not to allow that to happen, during my tenure as the executive director with the board. And fortunately, at this point, WIAA doesn't want any involvement with bowling because they've got limited resources, people, time, and money. And if they take bowling in, then they got to take something off the plate. And athletic directors aren't saying, we got to have bowling. So, so bowling at the high school and the middle school level, very important. The other big program that BCAW runs, and there's only one other state that runs it as a state program in the proprietor side, is over in Minnesota, and that's the USBC Pepsi program. So the USBC Youth Pepsi program is a benefit of membership from USBC for every certified league and every certified youth bowler in a certified league in a certified center. So up there at Wagner's, Karen Hull does a great job with that program and with those kids, getting them qualified out of their league into the, the regionals that are getting ready to take place here in Wisconsin. And then we qualify them from regional to the state. And then the state winners have an opportunity then to represent Wisconsin at junior gold. And Wisconsin, decades ago, saw the benefit of the proprietors running that program. And we've consistently, as proprietors, been the caretaker, the steward, the advocate of that program to protect our interests as proprietors, because volunteers at the local level, and I know you're on your local board up there in Eau Claire, you guys have, your hands are full. And Don Hildebrand, who just retired from the state USBC Association, his hands were full, already running, 3 of the biggest state tournaments in the country between the Open, the Women, and the Youth. Having one more big event like the state Pepsi tournament would look very, very different if the state association was running it. And for us in Wisconsin, because proprietors are running it, there's more opportunities for proprietors to drive lineage and revenue, because it goes from in-center to a regional to a state, where like down in Illinois and other states like Pennsylvania, they literally go from center to state, and the state tournament might be 2 or 3 weekends. And it might be, if I'm a kid bowling on the eastern side of the state, say Philly, and the state tournament's all the way on the other side of the state, say Pittsburgh, they might not make that trek for a 3 or 4 hour drive for that event. So for Wisconsin, as big a state as we are, it is a revenue enhancer for our members, or for the BCAW membership. So the other thing that they do training and education. BCAW does. They do that independently and in partnership with BPAA. BPAA has an excellent bowling university program that they've been putting together that program for about 8 or 10 years, but coming through COVID, they had to change what that model looked like. And so, a lot of that went online, a lot of that went down into the state level. So we, BCAW, were able to bring somebody like a Kelly Bednar or Bart Mix from Arlington into Wisconsin and do training and education on things like profitability and food and beverage. Or a year or two ago, they did an A2 mechanics class up at Dales Weston Lanes to help train mechanics on the basics of, A2 Brunswick machines. So that in a nutshell, and that's been a pretty long-winded nutshell, but it's about enhancing members' profitability and giving bowling centers also a way, associations in general, and I'm an association gal. I believe in joining whatever association I'm working with or for, but it's a way to network and meet other people in your industry, to share ideas and to learn and to pay it forward. And BCAW and their proprietors do what I think is the best job in the country, because while some parts of the country people won't share, how can I share with you if I'm at Wagner's and I'm over at Colfax at Viking Lanes and Lounge? Why would I, if I'm David Berg, want to share with Amy over at Colfax, because she's my competitor in some ways. And there are places in the country where proprietors just do not share because of that fear of sharing good ideas. And here in Wisconsin, we've had, just in my 10 years of involvement, the people like Pete Riopel and Dick Zerke and David Barden and Eric Giadella and Matt Orvis and, those people Dale Elliott, who share their best ideas, only makes bowling stronger in Wisconsin. And that's special. That's unique in our state. And people, if you're not out of here or don't talk to other people or didn't grow up somewhere else, you just wouldn't know that. But it's very special here. And I'm proud that BCAW, I saw their that article that I shared with you at 219 members currently for them. They've been very stable in membership in spite of bowling centers closing and changing hands over the last, particularly since the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. So you come in as the head of this and you get to work. And, I've read that you have, been able to get membership to grow and things have been good under your leadership. So I reached out to Hank Poznansky to kind of get a feel for, how you did in that role. And he said that you're very hardworking, very passionate advocate for whatever you put your mind to, and that you did remarkable work for the BCAW. He said, we're very proud to have had her as an executive director. We are a much better organization because of Yvonne. What's the key? What made that happen? What made that remarkable work happen?
Wow. Life in the Day of Hank. I just got to put a plug out there to his daughters for coining that years ago. It is about passion and it is about caring, but it's also understanding people and building relationships. And when the board interviewed me, the search committee that interviewed me, David Barden sat there and he said, our membership's been flat at 170 for 5 years. If we hired you, what would you do? And I said, well, what are you doing now? And he says, I don't think we're doing anything. Well, what's your budget? Well, I don't think we have a budget. And I said, well, we got to do something. We got a budget to do something to do it. And it's a relationship. And if somebody's not out meeting people in their bowling centers and building those relationships, 170 may be as many as we're going to get. And so the first year, my focus was really on more of the back office, the accounting and the human resource management and the IT. But then my second year, BPA coined it Bowlapalooza. I got on the road in August, and I told David, I kissed him goodbye and said, if I get north of Wausau, I can't get home for 2 weeks. And I went and visited every bowling center I could possibly get to, over a 2 or a 12-day period, 2 weeks or 12 days or whatever, and built relationships with people, meet them where they're at, understand what their day is like by being there with them. Jeremy Brenner in El Dorado, when I met him, a 6-lane center that had joined because he wanted to take part in a BPA national program. I went and visited him on a Saturday, and he had his 6 lanes going with birthday parties. I'm like, I'm really busy, but if you want to come back here and make pizzas with me, let's make pizzas and talk. And so I sat and made pizzas with the guy for 2 hours, and he's become one of my dearest friends. He's been on our Vintage Alleys tours. We've featured his center, but it's about relationships. And so for me, being interested in bowling and being able to talk, just walk in and cold call somebody and start up a conversation about bowling is pretty easy to do. I think you could do it. There are a lot of people that can't do it. They're not comfortable just walking in and cold calling or not knowing anybody. But if you understand a little bit about the commonality of the business of bowling, it's very easy to do. And there were bowling centers that I would visit. So up kind of towards you, Gibby's. I've been at Gibby's place every single year on Bowlapalooza because he was open at 11 o'clock and I was going between places I could stop in for lunch. And he was a non-member, and I'd leave him a note and say, Gibby, sorry, I missed you. Lunch was great. Hope to see you next time. And left him some information. And finally, in 2021, after my visit, BPA had a national program with Home Depot. And Gibby calls me and he says, I think it's time for me to finally join. You've been here every year for the last 7 years. Let's do this. So, did I hope that I'd get Gibby? Yeah, I did. But did I expect it? No, I didn't. And then once they're in and they start using these programs, particularly the Pepsi program from BPAA and Cisco, if they do a fair amount of food, and then the credit card merchant services program, those 3 alone for most bowling centers will pay their dues. And many would say it would cost them money not to be a member, but getting in the door and showing them those numbers and then being a trusted partner to them. I still have people today that call me that they knew if they had a problem, they could call me and I'd get them to the right person at BPA or the right person at Pepsi. And that's what it's about. And so to Hank's point, there's nobody I wouldn't take a call from or nobody that I wouldn't spend time to help, because that's what I believe a service heart in an association, what it takes to win over your members and then retain them and help them thrive in their business. Yeah. And Hank's a great example of somebody who's really growing, from what was kind of the old school of bowling through the leadership and the opportunities that were created during my tenure, because it wasn't just the good old boys anymore. And it wasn't just a small handful of people making decisions. There were more people under the tent taking part in and being allowed to express contrarian points of view without being ridiculed or chastised. And Hank's one of those guys that, as he was being groomed to be the president of BCAW, the fact that he appointed Jalen Honan onto the board as one of his first appointments as president was amazing to me, because she was young. She was a 3rd-generation proprietor, 2nd generation, actually, for her brother or her half-brother, Stefan, is 3rd generation. But the Honan family, in bowling, but she was like right out of college. She was 22 or 23 years old and being appointed onto the state board of directors. That shows some vision and some leadership on Hank's part, but that was not an environment where he could have probably successfully have done that 10 years ago.
Oh, you ready for some 6 degrees of pfefferation on some of those names you dropped?
Oh, okay.
Stefan's mother, Kim Stars, was my junior coach back in the mid 80s. David Barden's son, Jeremy, was a teammate of mine at UW Eau Claire. And Pete Riopel was my boss when I was, I think, a junior in college.
Wow.
So small world, right?
Great bowling families, every one of them. Kim just sold her Brown Deer Lanes. It's literally 5 minutes from my house here on the north side of Milwaukee. I knew Kim when I first worked at YABA. She would call me with YABA questions. So I knew Kim Stars back in the early 90s. And then when I came into BCAW, I then reacquainted with her. And then I met Stefan when he was running one of his dad's centers. And of course, now he and Cassie, his wife, are just doing great things with those two centers and with H5G, which, you know, I love that there is that next generation, that second and third, and in some cases, fourth generation staying in bowling, because there's just not a lot of that frankly is going on. And that's why we're seeing such an attrition in some places around the country, and in a limited, you know, amount here in Wisconsin. We've lost some centers because, you know, Dennis Sweet's son didn't want to run the Colonial up in Sparta anymore, so it got closed and became a gymnastics club. But, you know, for the most part, second and third generations are stepping up and staying involved here in Wisconsin, but that's few and far between around the country.
Man, Dennis was another one of my bosses when he was at Wagner's. So it's all kind of interconnected. I want to start kind of wrapping up, but I know that this is very important to you, and I want to talk about your induction into that Nation's Capital Association Hall of Fame. This was 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And you couldn't be there for that ceremony. I noticed that you sent me this thing. And
Actually, I was at the Nation's Capital Hall of Fame induction. The one I was not able to make was the BCAW Award of Excellence.
That's right, the Award.
Yeah, because I was still living in Yellowstone after I had retired the first time, so I was not able to make it, and my husband accepted. But my husband and I and a pretty robust crew from Wisconsin joined me at the Nation's Capital Hall of Fame in November of that Hall of Fame in 2019. Yep.
Yeah. What was that feeling like? How'd you learn about it, and what was that feeling like to get in?
Well, it was bittersweet, I'll admit it. So again, because I was a product of the 70s and 80s, I had no 300s to my credit. I had no 700s to my credit, and I had never averaged 200. So the board of directors that was considering my nomination the first 3 years weren't very impressed with what I had accomplished. And, you know, they were comparing today's scoring environment to, again, a kid that grew up in the sport in the 70s and 80s. So for 3 years, I was passed by the board of directors, but I always felt that if my nomination moved forward to their Hall of Fame committee, which is the Veterans Committee, is what the Nation's Capital Association calls it, those were my peers and my colleagues and the people I competed with and against back in the day. And I felt relatively confident that they would recognize and appreciate my performance as an athlete, and also recognize the service that I had had, not just in Nation's Capital for a few years, but what I was doing nationally. So I was fortunate that Cheryl Jelks, you mentioned Willie Jelks earlier, Cheryl and Ricky Brooks carried my nomination, and I think advocated pretty strongly on my behalf that my credentials and my contributions to the sport and service were worthy of being considered. So yes, it was very important to me, and it was nice because a lot of people who were in that Hall of Fame that had not been to a Hall of Fame induction since they had gone in came out of respect for me and my going into the Hall of Fame. And then, like I said, I did have several people from here in Wisconsin. Roger Dalkin actually did my induction, so that was pretty emotional for both of us. Chuck Tarosian, who's a proprietor at River City Lanes in Waterford, joined us, and Barb Conrad, who's a volunteer in many of the BCAW programs, joined me and my family in Washington, D.C. for the Hall of Fame. So it was nice to have support from Wisconsin, you know, there in Washington, D.C. when I went into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does. It means a lot to me. And again, it just shows that just a kid who enjoyed bowling, who had some marginal success or, you know, some, you know, local success can be recognized too. That's the other thing about the DC market, that so many people, very rarely did you grow up in DC. People moved there because they were affiliated with the military or the government, and families came and went every 4, 6, or 8 years. So the people that, I bowled with, whether it was in high school or later while I was attending college or then as an adult, a lot of them are gone. They're in other parts of the country because they weren't really from DC. So that's the other part of, the people on a board of directors considering nominations. I like what Madison and the state association have done. Jeff Riggles has been, the carrier of, trying to quantify and legitimize board selections out of it being a popularity contest, because there are certain criteria that bowlers, by virtue of their skills or their accomplishments, should be considered more seriously for a Hall of Fame. And so, yeah, halls of fame are the way that we sort of validate the importance of people and their contributions, either on the lanes or through service. And yeah, it is an important thing to me.
Yeah. Plus, you're in the same Hall of Fame as people like Patty Costello and Richie Wolf.
Well, Patty Costello, I again, we could go till 10 o'clock. I have Patty Costello stories. Richie Wolf is one of my dearest friends to this day. He and Ken were good friends. He signed Ken's PBA application, actually. And so, yeah, there are some good people and some legacy people that have, been recognized and part of our home association there. So I'm proud to be from DC. Yep.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the start, you have a consulting company. You're in, the Vintage Alleys Tour in a consultant's role. What does the future hold? I mean, do you continue with that and the Vintage Alleys Tour? Are there other parts of the bowling industry that pique your interest? What's next for you?
Wow. That's a really loaded question. I will tell you that at the age of 67, 67, is that right? Yeah, 67. I am looking forward to full retirement and not worrying about bowling and being involved. I did this year under a consultant arrangement with BCAW out of respect and concern for the association and wanting to see this program move forward. Their new executive director, Alyssa Klopatic, along with Roger Dalkin, who is now their former executive director, but still on staff, they both are committed to seeing the program go forward. The timing this year was just hard for them, given the number of programs they have going on literally from February 1st to May 1st. So it made sense for them to continue the program, but ask me to step in. Bennett Consulting Group, quite frankly, was only created. So when I was working in youth soccer in the state of Wisconsin, I had worked a couple of years at the club level, running a facility and a 13,000 membership organization. And when I moved from working in youth soccer to another trade association, my first trade association, the National Funeral Directors Association, I was at that point already doing consulting and speaking engagements with groups like Athletic Business, US Youth Soccer. And I wanted to continue doing that, but I never felt like I would carry respect. It was one thing to say I'm the executive director of the Milwaukee Kickers Soccer Club, but now to go in and say I'm the chief operating officer of the National Funeral Directors Association, people are going to say, how does that have anything to do with my soccer club or my volleyball league or my facility management? So I created Bennett Consulting Group as I was transitioning from the Milwaukee Kickers to funeral service in 2002. And I continued to do speaking engagements and consulting work primarily in soccer. And that's how I ended up winding back into soccer in 2007. So then I went back to work for soccer in 2007, was there for 4 years, and did quite a bit of extensive work for them in strategic planning at the state and national level. And then just kind of had this shell, this LLC called Bennett Consulting, that anytime my husband and I wanted to do side gig work, we could just run it through Bennett Consulting from a tax perspective. So David is the other half of Bennett Consulting, and his passion and his interests are in the IT area. And while I was the executive director, we had some IT issues and couldn't really afford, like street market pricing for IT services. So David became our IT guy with board approval because of the conflict of interest, obviously. And he has maintained that relationship with BCAW through Neil, through Roger, and now with Alyssa. So at some point that will come to an end. And David and Vaughn will go off into retirement, whether that's in Tennessee or Texas. We're not really sure where we'll land, but I don't see bowling from a work perspective in our future too much beyond 26, maybe. It's just time for us to move on. And there's so many things that I have other interests and passions in that while my health is good and, once he finally kind of retires from what he's doing, there are other things we want to do.
Yeah.
But thanks. I mean, I love bowling and it's hard for me to let go. In fact, I sent Alyssa an email just today. There are certain things I just have to realize it's not my rodeo and not my cowboys, and I need to let go. And sometimes it's hard when you're I call it the peanut gallery, when you're in the peanut gallery and you're seeing things or people are in your ears because they know that you either have Roger's ear or that you have a relationship with Alyssa that, they want to vent to me, and I have to sort of shut that down because I can't expend the energy or the emotion on it. So that's my public plea to anybody listening to this, that if you're not happy or you got great ideas, please share them directly with Roger and Alyssa at the office. Yeah. That's a great way to end this, actually.
It's not lost on me that I'm assuming purposely did not go with the circus monkeys analogy and instead with the rodeo and cowboys.
Well, when I left BCAW the first time, and again, one of my passions is the West and Yellowstone and Grand Tetons and Montana. And so I'd seen the Not My Circus, Not My Monkeys. I'm like, yeah, that's just not me. So I actually have a rodeo picture that I took at the Cody Rodeo, and it's the horse bucking a cowboy off. And I have Not My Rodeo, Not My Cowboys. So every now and then when I start getting a little cranky or feisty on Facebook, you'll see that thing pop up. But glad that you noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
There's an inside story to it.
All right, let's take it in this direction now.
Let's go off the sheet. Challenge a bowler to appear on a future episode.
I would like to challenge Will Madison.
I would say Diana Zavulova.
The Better Russo, Lauren Russo.
We're looking for anyone who has a passion for the sport and a unique story to tell.
I'm really glad that not only do you know about Off the Sheet, but it seems like you've put a lot of thought into who you're going to challenge, which is great. I don't want to put any pressure on you by saying, Yvonne Bennett, who would you like to challenge? But it's kind of that time, right? So who would you like to challenge?
Well, I liked when we talked earlier about, if you go off the sheet legitimately, that's a three-bagger, right?
That's
so
right.
I'm going to give you three names.
Okay.
My story in bowling today would not have happened without Roger Dalkin. And I've already talked about what he's meant to me as a friend, a colleague, a mentor over the years. So I would challenge Roger Dalkin first. We also talked about Kevin Hong and the Vintage Alleys project, his Maple plus Pine project. I think Kevin Hong has a great story to share, and I would love to see him on the podcast at some point. And then my last one is a young man who came into my world over the summer. In Western New York, his name is Joey Dayer, Dayer. I don't know if he will tune in or if he's been on the podcast today or we'll look at it. But Joey is somebody who he's 20 years old, I believe, and he follows certain groups in social media on vintage bowling. And after my trip out east, to Buffalo, I went to the Corpus Christi Church. Was in rough shape. It is a 12-lane AMF center. And out of 12 lanes, 8 of them were not running and the place had not been operational for at least 2 years. So in my social media, I just posted, can anybody help these guys get up and back running? And as you know, mechanics in general are hard to find. And Joey Dayer he goes by Joe the Pro. He's the head mechanic at a bowling center. He's rebuilding his bowling center where he works, but he went in as a volunteer and did a lot of work and has those 12 lanes up and running in Buffalo, New York. And to me, that's a great story of somebody giving back to the sport in an area where we as an industry don't talk a whole lot about who is that next generation of mechanics and media and proprietors and coaches and pro shop operators. And there's Joey Dare at the age of 20 doing it. And so I think his story, it's a great story. And he's somebody who I think has a lot to share in his experience, even though he's relatively just a young kid.
Yeah.
So those are my three.
Age isn't everything. I mean, it sounds like he's wise beyond his years to preserve that, that part of the sport in Buffalo. And, I hope all three of them get on board, meet your challenge head on. And to do that, you can find me on Facebook, Andrew Pfeffer, or just email me, bowlingwiththepfeff@yahoo.com. I'd be happy to make that happen because all three sound like great stories. Our next episode, our next show isn't actually coming on for about a week and a half now. March 15th, which is a Saturday, is when we're going on with Dakota Christensen. Now, Dakota is really ripping them up this year. He is in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He's out averaging most of us in the Big 8+ league, and I say us because that's a league that I bowl on, by a pretty big margin. He's got multiple honor scores to go with that this season and took down some of the area's best a couple months ago at the Bullwinkles Eliminator Tournament in Eau Claire. We will chat with him about all that, his coaching and more. Saturday, March 15th, 1 p.m. Central. It's kind of a different time. We did have some scheduling conflicts that had to work around, but I hope everyone will join us when we talk about Dakota's story. Yvonne, it has been a pleasure having you on. Long overdue, I think, but I'm glad we got to meet up and promote Vintage Alley's tour and all that good stuff. So best to you in this Vintage Alley's tour, and as far forward as that goes for you, and all the rest. It's been a great conversation.
Well, thank you so much. And News at 11 on the fall tour will be rolling out an announcement as soon as the NFL and Badger schedules are published for the fall season. We've got an area picked out, and we just need to firm up the dates around football in the fall. So look for that a little bit later this spring.
I'll be putting in the call to Roger Goodell to get on it, get that schedule out so we can get our Vintage Alleys tour schedule out. And yeah, hope everybody has a chance to look at that and maybe even join up, because it sounds like a fantastic event. I'm hoping I can kind of latch on to the very end of this one if my schedule permits, because I'd love to not only document it, but kind of take it in, because it's a great idea.
We'd love to see you there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thanks to everyone who is watching tonight. We will see you again on the 15th. Until then, have a great week.
Thank you for watching Bowling with the Pfeff. Pound the like button and subscribe button. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it's free. Bowling with the Pfeff is brought to you by Chip Magnet. Raise your snack standards.
Jerry's Score More Bowling Supply inside Wagner's Lane. So Eau Claire, Wisconsin area's leader in bowling products and services since 1988. And Visionary Video Hub. Video with impact.
Email bowlingwiththepfeff@yahoo.com with questions or to appear on the show. You can also reach out on your favorite social media platform.